The combine is almost over and it's left everybody with a bunch of questions. You guys sent us your thoughts and we're going to answer them right now. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com. And my partner in crime, Jake Arthur, is our residential Jeffrey Bossa fan on the ground. That's right, Jeffrey Bossa's fan club, courtesy of just one person here. Today, we are doing a Q&A episode. The NFL Combine is just about wrapped up. Jake and I are here for the last time this year, or last time this Combine season, I guess, in the same room. So we're here doing your Q&A based on everything draft-related, Combine-related. You guys sent us a couple hundred questions, so we're going to do our best to get through as many as possible because we want to answer everything for you guys. If we don't get to your question today, though, don't worry. We have plenty more Q&A episodes coming up. And again, we thank you all very much for sending in so many questions on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on the Insider program. You guys are the best. But Jake, before I keep rambling here, let's get into some of these questions because, again, so many draft and combine-related questions from our fans today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we love these ones because it's literally you guys telling us what you want to hear. So let's go ahead and dive right to it. This is obviously going to be skewed mostly towards the draft. A lot of either-ors and just odd situations in these. But first one is with Malachi Starks still on the board at 14. He would be the lowest Raz ever taken in the first by Chris Ballard by several full points. Do you think this would factor into passing on him at 14 and snagging someone else like a Jahad Campbell or, a defensive tackle to take over long-term for DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart? Or do we think that they would stick and pick with Starks and that would kind of bring in a new era of Ballard of being a little more thoughtful when it comes to who they're considering?
Yeah, I will say I don't think Chris Ballard looks at the RAS stuff, the relative athletic score. I know that there is a big correlation between who he drafts and the RAS or relative athletic score system. But I think it just happens to work out the way. He likes super athletes, and super athletes typically test well.
With size.
Yeah. Right. When it comes to a guy like Malachi Starks, yes, he's not the super athlete that Chris Ballard typically drafts, but I don't think that necessarily excludes him from what Ballard would take. I mean, you look at some of the safeties he's taken in the past. He's liked Kari Willis, who is more of an average athlete. I would argue that Julian Blackmon probably, if he would have tested, wouldn't have tested like a superstar. And heck, he's taken 3 safeties that didn't do any tests at the combine. So with safety, it does seem it's more of a feel and more of the GPS data where Malachi Starks really does shine. But yeah, the testing does hurt his chances of being a Colts pick at number 14.
Yeah.
For the Colts to take a non-trench or skill position player at that high of a pick, I've always abstained that it has to be a blue chip player on their board. And will Malachi Starks be a blue chip player on their board with those athletic scores? I think that's a pretty realistic question to ask right now. So great question. I could totally see them leaning towards like a Jahad Campbell or even a defensive tackle or an offensive lineman at that pick over a guy like Starks because of those athletic scores. Because again, for Ballard to go away from his philosophy of trenches first, it does kind of need to be a blue chip player. And is Malachi Starks a blue chip player for him? I'm not too sure.
Right. It's certainly a question mark, but I do think that Chris is willing to kind of bend things a little bit. I mean, when blue chip guys, even if they aren't prototypically what they need or what they normally would get, fall in their lap, I think it happens. The very first year, Malik Hooker, no one really thought he would be there at like 16 or 17, whatever it was that the Colts picked him. But that's a blue chip player who I don't know about generational, but like certainly one of the draft's like few elite players they considered. Laiatu Latu, who is a decent athlete, but not like a workout warrior by any means, was kind of against the trends of Chris Ballard, but they felt he was a blue chip player.
Yep.
And so I think Starks could fit right into that. Certainly having better testing scores really would have helped. But I thought his field workout was great.
Yeah.
And I don't, if they pass on Starks, I don't think it's necessarily would be because of Starks, but like Jihad Campbell, for example, this Lou Anarumo defense, I've heard the word multiple thrown out a bunch. Jihad Campbell is one of the most impactful multiple defenders in this draft. And it really is going to come down to whether they think a guy like Campbell or Starks, for example, if they're both there, would have a bigger impact on their defense. So I think Starks is still very much someone they would consider very highly. I know Chris Ballard likes Georgia defensive backs as well, so that's kind of an extra little layer to it. But I don't really think the lack of elite testing damaged his chances much. So kind of went long-winded with that one, but here's the next one. This is from Stephen Burton on Twitter. If Warren and Starks are gone, Tyler Warren and Malachi Starks are gone, what do you do at 14? So let's say the two biggest, most mocked players to the Colts are gone. What do you do, Zach?
I mean, obviously free agency is a big part of this. Like, do the Colts go out there and get a defensive back? Do they get a linebacker in free agency? Do they what happens with the offensive line? I think is a big part of this equation. I would say as of right now, they do what we expect in terms of bringing back Will Fries, getting a veteran defensive back. I would say Jihad Campbell if he's there. Jihad Campbell might go top 10 because he is that fantastic of a prospect, but a young player with his eyes, his physicality, his athleticism, if he's there at 14, even with Starks, and honestly, look, if it's me, even with Warren on the board, I think I would take Jihad Campbell at that point. I think he's that good of a prospect, and I think he would drastically change this defense. So I might just say Jihad Campbell regardless. But if we're talking for the Colts, I think O-line will be a big consideration and maybe even defensive line.
Yeah, I think there's a nice chunk of players that could be available there. Certainly, maybe one or two. If you take Starks and Warren away, Colston Loveland is an option. Nick Amenworry is an option. Campbell, obviously, Javon Walker. Like, there is several guys out there you could choose from. And if by any chance all of them are gone or someone you're not in love with, I'm kind of in favor of trading back too. I don't think there's a huge drop off in talent if you went down to like 20, for example. So next up, do the Colts go right tackle over corner and safety if Tyler Warren is off the board and if Braden Smith is unlikely to return? So in this scenario, no Tyler Warren there. Braden Smith is not with the Colts anymore. Do you go with that right tackle like a Armand Membo or something over a defensive back in round one?
I'm not saying I would do that in this class because I'm not sure there is a corner. I mean, safety, obviously, I would take Starks at 14. Yeah. I'm not out on Starks right now. I know it made it sound like that with the beginning of this. I'm not out on Starks. I would personally take him at 14, but I do think the Colts, because of their trench emphasis, how much they value that. The question they have to ask themselves is, are we so confident in a Mac Gonsalves that we would, pass over a guy like Simmons from Ohio State or Jackson from Ohio State or Membu from Missouri? Do we overlook those guys because of Gonsalves, or do we just keep adding to that line? So for me personally, I would go Starks or Amenworry maybe at 14. I'm not sure there's a corner I would take there. But on the offensive line, or when it comes to the Colts, I mean, offensive line's always in play. It's Chris Ballard. He will throw resources at the trenches, and offensive line is a big part of that.
Absolutely. All right, so this next one, last year we all assumed that Quinion Mitchell was the Colts pick, and I wish he was, this person says in parentheses. But even with him on the board, the Colts went another direction. Do you think that could happen again if Tyler Warren and Malachi Starks are on the board when they're on the clock? So we can kind of answer that one quickly. And you kind of have as well. Jihad Campbell. Is there anyone else who's on the board? Maybe they fall and you would take, because this guy I know you're not really super strong on, but like Will Johnson is a good example. That's certainly someone the Colts could be really high on. Someone like that. Like if one of these really good offensive linemen or edge guys falls, I could see that maybe being the case. But certainly for us, I think Tyler Warren, Jihad Campbell, Malachi Starks make the most sense at 14.
Yeah, if I'm speaking purely for the Colts here, what I think the Colts would do, this has nothing to do with Zach Hicks right here. What I think the Colts would do, I'm not sure they're going to have many players over Tyler Warren that fit that perfect combination of an exact need we have and a blue chip player. in this draft. So it's almost like the Brock Bowers situation last year where they were trying to move up for Brock Bowers. I could see them trying to move up for a Tyler Warren because he fits everything they're looking for, and he's a dynamic weapon to add to the offense. Malachi Starks, I could totally see them passing on him. But Warren, I'd be very, very shocked if they had anybody they would take over him at 14. Like if he's on the board at 14, I would be more shocked this year if they passed on Warren than I was last year when they passed on Mitchell, because Warren is kind of what they're looking for. Mitchell, yes, if it would have fit a need, but Chris Ballard values trenches and skill position players at the top of the draft. So unless he had Quinion Mitchell as a top tier blue chip player, which clearly they didn't because they didn't take him, then I wasn't going to see Mitchell going at 15. But this year with Warren, he fits so much of what they're looking for. If he's there at 14 and they don't take him, I would be floored. I'd be very, very floored if that happened.
Yeah, the Colts are not really able to hide their desire and needs for a tight end anymore. That would be absolutely shocking, because what does Tyler Warren not offer that you absolutely need? So coming up, guys, you had some obviously more questions for us that revolved around the rest of the draft as well, not even just what's going to happen with the tops. We'll get to that in just a moment. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on all that sweet action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. Plus, if you're looking for a bigger payout, combine all that together for a nice little same-game parlay. I personally love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Even some of the best games have lulls, and you're looking to spice things up a little bit. So just flip through whatever in-game options they've got and really spice things up a little bit. Plus, the app's easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Zach is certainly a menace during these ad reads, and you guys were menaces when you were coming up with your questions, and that's why we have a ton to choose from here. So this first one, based on the cornerback class, who do you think the Colts are most likely to target for Lou Anarumo's system that's realistic to get in the second, third round? And thank you, guys. I don't think anyone could have crafted a better question for Zach to answer, because this is his wheelhouse this year especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think Darian Porter's the obvious one we're looking at here. Again, the film's not perfect. The age is a concern, being 25 years old, but tall, physical, explosive, athletic. I mean, a big-time special teamer as well. Look, he might go a little bit higher than I would take him. I would personally take him back of round 3 into early round 4. I know the testing is great, but the film is a little bit concerning. But he's a player where you have to probably reach to get him, and he fits what the Colts want in this system. So I think he's certainly a guy you're looking at there. Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State is another one you're looking at. Again, his range is anywhere from 20th overall to 50, 60. So
it's kind of AD Mitchell,
right
this year.
Right. So you could see him go in the back of round 1 and not have a chance to take him, but he could certainly be there at 46 as well. He didn't do his testing, which was a little bit shocking to me. So that could make me turn some teams off from him there and maybe add some concerns or something. So he might be able to fall to a pick like number 46 for the Colts. So I think those are two big guys. And then the UTSA corner, Za Frazier. Look, man, 6'3", 187, 32-inch arms, running in the 4.3s. He's pretty stiff on film, and I do think there is a lot of development needed there. But again, if we're looking for these big athletic corners that can turn and run, I think those are the guys you're looking for. And then if you even want to go a little bit outside of the typing, Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky just can absolutely fly. The film is really good. He might sneak into the back of round 1 as well. But if he's there in round 2, you might have to stretch the bounds of your what you're looking for and go like, okay, we'll go with the 5'11" guy, the 5'10" guy instead of the 6-foot guy, because he's just that good of an athlete. So yeah, there's plenty of corners in this class on day 2, and those are just 4 of them. I think there's plenty more that could fit the Colts.
I'll give a couple in there as well. Noel Williams from Cal. That's another big athletic guy with ball skills. A big dark horse, Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. Undersized guy. And if you say he's just Kenny Moore's backup, then yeah, that's way too early, third round, let's say. But if they see him as a big piece of the future and someone they can move around a bit, because he is primarily a slot guy, sure. But if you think he's versatile enough, or you think he has, an elite trait, which the Colts are always willing to kind of bend their parameters for, then I think he's kind of a dark horse. I like that one a little bit. With the Colts likely to take a running back, will they go more towards a balanced RB2 type or look for a receiving back in this draft?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you probably want to get a complement for Jonathan Taylor. So a pass catcher that can also pass block is something that feels pretty much like a big need. But personally, I'm in favor of just adding someone who's a capable player to the running back room. Yeah. So even if it is just, this is a secondary bell cow running back who can eat up 25% of the snaps, 30% of the snaps, and 30% of the carries, I guess, not snaps, but a guy who can just get in there and give Jonathan Taylor some rest and maybe keep him a little bit healthier down the stretch of these seasons. I could take that as well. Like, it doesn't have to be a Nyheim Hines or a Kenneth Gainwell. It can also just be, adding a David Montgomery type to the Jahmyr Gibbs that is Jonathan Taylor. It doesn't have to be this perfect scat back in this offense. Like, just give me another guy who's capable of carrying the football, and I'll consider that a win for the Colts, because what they put out there last year behind Taylor just wasn't good enough. And if Taylor misses time, you need guys who can tote the rock a little bit. So I just want somebody who's a capable player back there.
Yeah, without question. And, we've talked about this with our guy, Destin, who's actually going to have a question for us here in a second. But when you're looking at drafting a running back in this class, let's just say you do one. Don't even approach them if they're not capable of pass blocking. The next guy has got to be able to do that, because that was Trey Sermon's whole bread and butter. But that's about all he could do. Very much a guy who's going to get you 1, 2, 3 yards, but he could pass protect a little bit. But if you can get a guy that's able to run the ball a little bit and catch a little bit, but he's a really good pass blocker, it's a good idea. 3 of my personal favorites, if you're looking around round 4-ish. So CJ Harvey, Ollie Gordon, and Damian Martinez. Those are 3 guys who I think are very well balanced. From talking to them this week, I think they all have the right mentality as well. So those are guys I've got my eyes on.
RJ Harvey.
What'd I say?
You said CJ Harvey. I was trying to think of whoever the heck that was.
That's the same name. That is the same name. I don't care. And then from our guy, Felipe Costa, all the way in Brazil, considering tight end, cornerback, safety, and linebacker are the Colts' biggest needs. Which would be the best case scenarios for each to address between free agency and the draft? Like, which one of those 4 needs would you prefer be mostly dealt with in free agency versus the draft?
Yeah, I'll be real quick with this. Tight end, I would say draft. Cornerback, mostly free agency, but maybe you grab one in the draft. Safety, mostly draft, but maybe you grab one in free agency. And linebacker, probably the draft, actually. I think just get me another guy who can run. I think maybe a special teamer in free agency, but I could use a young linebacker in here as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I have lofty expectations for this offseason. Not expectations, more demands.
Oh, you're setting up yourself to hurt here, buddy.
Always. But no, if they're talking the talk, and if they're serious about getting better and fixing things, then they're going to need to be active in both, obviously. So tight end, I think they obviously have to draft a capable starter within the first 3 rounds. But I don't think it's super fair to expect a tight end to immediately come in and fix the situation. So in that instance, I think you have to get just an average, whatever level veteran tight end who you're confident can play as well, because you kind of have to remake your tight end room this year. So investing all in rookies, I don't think is a great idea, but you do need at least one hopeful star that you're drafting there. Cornerback, I think free agency is probably my most likely scenario, although there's obviously guys in the draft that we really like. Safety, go draft one. Linebacker, go draft one. Although there's a couple small level free agents that are mostly special teamers that I like, but when they've been able to play defense, they've been pretty productive. There's that Sewell kid out of New Orleans, and then the guy who used to play for Purdue out of the 49ers. Obviously not household names because I can't remember them right now, but I like those guys quite a bit. But yeah, I think the draft would primarily be my focus there. So coming up on these next ones from Destin, and a couple people asked about this. Would love to hear how you guys think about how Harold Fannin looked during his testing, and if he would be a good fit with the Colts or not.
Yeah, so Harold Fannin clearly looked like a guy who had to put on about 20 plus pounds to come to this combine. I'm
Yeah.
not sure why he tested while putting up 20 pounds of water weight on
No other
because
good tight ends tested for the most
yeah,
part.
because he tested like a guy who had to throw on 20 pounds in a couple weeks, and that's kind of how the testing looked. I do think he's kind of a weird mover on film, and I did like him more in like that round 3-ish range. But the more I've kind of gone into this offseason with the tight end need for the Colts, I think they just need a guy who can make sure they can live in 11 personnel. And if Fannin is at the weight that he's more comfortable being at, which is like 220, 225, rather than what he showed up at the combine, I'm not sure he's a guy who can help you live in 11 personnel. So, yeah, the testing was bad as expected, though, because he put on that crazy weight that he had to show for teams. And the fit with the Colts, if he has to play at 220 in the NFL or 225, it's probably not a great fit with the Colts wanting to live in 11 personnel.
I agree. I think his best chance at success is just doing what the closest thing possible to what he did in college, and that's playing at a similar weight, because obviously playing at 235-ish or so it's not going to look good. So if he's closer to 225, I think you can get some of that dynamic playmaking out of him. He's not going to be an inline blocker. Like, can he block on the move and be a decent pass blocker in the NFL? I think that's possible. But no, he's not going to be a guy who's going to stick his nose in the defensive end's chest and drive him back on the goal line. He's going to be a niche player probably, and you're just going to have to figure out how to maximize that in the NFL. All right, and these next couple real quick are from our boy Kenan. First, what are the odds that the Colts draft multiple tight ends? And then second, did anyone pop in testing to make you think about going back and reviewing the tape?
Yeah, I mean, multiple tight ends, I think they certainly could draft multiple. They don't really have that many on the roster right now. But again, I think a big thing the Colts want to do is get a tight end that can help them live in 11 personnel and be their kind of bell cow at the position. So I think more so it's like we're going to target a top end tight end, and then we might have like Drew Ogletree and Will Mallory round out the room.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if 2 tight ends are really on the board. Like maybe if they take a guy in like round 3, they might grab another one in like round 4 or 5. But again, that leads us to the issue that happened last year where it's a lot of pieces of a tight end, not an actual tight end.
Yeah.
So I think we're looking at a Warren, a Loveland, or a Mason Taylor type player. Maybe Fedone from Nebraska. I'm a little intrigued there. But outside of that, I don't think there's many tight ends they're looking at because I don't know how many can live in 11 personnel. Then when it comes to anyone popping and testing, I mean, honestly, again, the UTSA corner, I really got to go back and watch more of that film because that was some freaky testing. Maxwell Hairston as well. When you're hitting those low numbers, I think a couple offensive linemen are going to send us back to the film for sure because some of these guys are going to be freaky. Defensive line, Landon Jackson from Arkansas.
That was going to be
because he didn't have a good Senior Bowl week. He had a good Senior Bowl game. But, I mean, with those traits, you got to look at them for sure.
Yeah, without question. So me, drafting multiple tight ends, I think like Zach said, I would prefer to kind of draft an alpha early, an every down tight end. And then if you want, like in round 6 or 7, if you want to take a flyer on a guy like Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, long injury history, but certainly a guy who has potential. Like he was being talked about as an early round pick this time last year. So if you want to take a shot on a guy like that at the end of the draft, I don't have any problems with that. So coming up, guys, we're going to round this thing off with a lightning round, and that's going to come up in just a moment. All right, we're going to be quick through these, Zach. Let me hit you. A lot of these are kind of either or. So first up, Tyler Warren and Jeffrey Bassa or Jihad Campbell and Mason Taylor? Which combo would you prefer to come out of the draft with?
It's funny you're asking me. I think this question was asked with you in mind.
Oh, I know.
I'm pretty sure. For me, it's not as difficult as it might be for you. I would go with Jihad Campbell and Mason Taylor. I think that's the dream first 2 pairing for me personally at this point. Like you're getting me an alpha linebacker that can also rush off the edge, and I'm getting my tight end that can help me live in 11 personnel. I'm getting everything I need right there. So I Jihad Campbell and Mason Taylor far and away for me, but it's probably a little bit closer for you, Jake.
Believe it or not, I'm right there with you. I mean, obviously I love Jeffrey Bassa, but I'm not ignorant. Like I know he's not my number 1 linebacker in the draft.
Close, I bet. He's close still. Don't worry.
He's up there. I'm not gonna lie to you. So Jihad Campbell, obviously if you're comparing Bassa to Campbell, Campbell is the winner there. He brings more to your defense. He's a more impactful player. And then Mason Taylor is my 3rd tight end. I'd be super comfortable with him if the Colts went up, if they felt like they were going to miss out on him and traded up to like 38 to get him. I would be fine with that. So yeah, love Mason Taylor, love Jahad Campbell. Obviously love Tyler Warren and Jeffrey Bossa as well. But if we're comparing the two, one of them I lean slightly more towards. So next up, underrated tight end. That is the pick if Warren isn't available or the Colts can't trade up like last year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go a little bit more underrated in terms of people talking about. I mentioned him in the last segment there. Thomas Fadone from Nebraska. Testing was really good. On-field drills looked really smooth. Receiving production wasn't always there in college, but they asked him to block a little bit more. But you can see the receiving chops a little bit with him. So I'm pretty intrigued by him. He's one of the few guys I think they can live in 11 personnel with. And then also at Iowa, Luke Lachey, I believe that's how you say his last name is Lachey. That's another guy where, again, he knows how to block. He looked more athletic in 2023 and looked more comfortable as a pass catcher when he wasn't dealing with the injuries. So Lachey or Fredone, I think, are the two guys I'm really looking at if the Colts have to take a tight end in like round 3 or 4.
Yeah, another underrated guy for me is Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. I think he's got some tools to be more of a blocker than he's kind of shown, but Oregon tight ends, you're not really asking them to be the classic tight end necessarily, but they can certainly make a name for themselves. And a lot of people are going to bring up Elijah Arroyo, which I do love him as a player, but I'm not going to act like the knees don't scare me. So if the Colts drafted him, like I certainly think he's a great player who I like, but the knees I think are worrisome, especially since that was the biggest question about him from Miami. And then he left the Senior Bowl with a knee injury as well. So,
yeah,
and then didn't work out. So
there's an Alabama tight end you also really like.
Yeah, no, this dude has aura for days. That Alabama tight end who is running around with the mustache and the absolute wagon, like that. Pick him in the second. I don't care. Like he's at least gonna bring a solid team spirit to the team that the locker room could really use.
He's Hale Henches, but driving a truck.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the wagon he's dragging. All right. So do the Colts take a quarterback or do they stick to free agency? I like this one.
You know, I'm kind of talking myself into the draft thing with the quarterback just to get it on a cheap deal.
Yeah.
But so I'm like I'm talking myself into it for a completely different reason than everybody else is. Everyone's like, give me Will Howard in the 4th to compete with Anthony. I'm like, give me Will Howard in the 4th just so the backup isn't $10 million a year. Like I'll take the backup being on $800,000 a year instead. Yeah. So I'm kind of more so wanting to go in the draft just to stay cheap because when I look at these free agent quarterbacks, I don't want to pay any of them more than pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And with this current quarterback environment, they're going to want like 10, 11, 12. Like Jameis is going to get close to 10 million a year. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of in favor of drafting one just so the backup is cheap. And who knows, maybe you get a Brock Purdy and strike gold. I know it's extremely unlikely, but yeah, I'll just take the cheap backup.
But with Richardson, the backup's probably going to have to play at some point.
That's fine. What's the Peyton Manning quote or whatever? The backup has to play.
Well, it's a family show, so we're not going to use all that. It was a Tom Moore quote.
Tom Moore quote. Yeah, if the backup has to play, then we're not going to win.
Yeah,
we're not going to win.
We're effed, and we don't practice effed.
Yeah, so that's what the world I'm going to live in with this.
So me personally, I would do both. I would bring in kind of a mid veteran to be the primary backup, and if you want to draft a quarterback in the mid to late rounds, as long as it's one that I like and don't dislike, then I'm okay with that. So. Next up from Stephen Burton, what tight end? What tight end round 2 would you prefer most? I mean, Mason Taylor.
Yeah, I think Mason Taylor is where we're both at with that. I mean, Mason Taylor is our tight end 3, and I think he's a guy who can help them live in 11 personnel. I'm excited for Mason Taylor. I hope Mason Taylor is the round 2 pick for the Colts.
Yeah, and a guy like Gunnar Helm is kind of working himself down the ladder.
Yeah, probably round 4 or 5 with that testing this week.
Yeah. So this is kind of a development as of today. Do you draft a tight end or trade for Mayer or both? Michael Mayer from the Raiders, who kind of fell out of favor after the Raiders drafted Brock Bowers and now appears to be on the trade block.
I think the Colts could maybe swing a trade prior to the draft just so they don't pigeonhole themselves to having to take a tight end. I mean, again, if Warren's there at 14 and you trade for Mayer, cool. You have 2 good tight ends. But if you trade for Mayer and Warren goes before 14, then you don't feel like you have to take a tight end at all in this draft. Whereas if you don't trade for Mayer, you do feel like you need to take a tight end at some point. So I could see that they don't want to pigeonhole themselves, or if they don't feel good about Warren getting there, or they don't like Loveland or Mason Taylor. But I'm not too sure right now. I think it's certainly an option to trade for a guy like Michael Mayer, though.
Yeah, for sure. And then this one's from Kennan. Who did Chris Ballard feel the most during testing?
Oh, my gosh. He was running on the field for Shamar Stewart, I'm sure. I'm sure he was running down there doing the soccer-style celebration, ripping his shirt off and and screaming out of joy. I mean, come on, who didn't feel Shamar Stewart's workout or Nick Emanwari? Who didn't feel that workout? I was pumped up watching it in the Combine Convention Center. When you're seeing a 220-pound safety hitting 4.38 and the crowd's going wild for it, yeah, I mean, who wouldn't feel something like that?
Well, I'll go a little practical because I guess Chris was on the field during tight ends, and Mason Taylor had a nice field workout, looked like a ready-made pro. So that's an easy layup answer.
You know who he was really feeling was that Alabama tight end.
Yeah, of course.
He was feeling up that mustache.
But for South Carolina's tight end kind of tested out of the world too, though. So I wonder if I forget his name, but I wonder if he's kind of a dark horse for the late rounds. But
yeah, because look, it's all on the table for sure.
Yeah. All right. Also from Kenan, who is your favorite interview of the week?
I was excited to come into this week and talk to UConn right tackle Chase Lunt, a big time nerd for players like him, where I call them the Howard Mudd tight ends, the Caleb McGarry archetype of tight end. So I had a couple minutes to talk to him and really like ask him about his technique, his angle setting, kind of his process, and how he approaches playing offensive tackle. And the fact that I was able to get like a good 2 minutes with one of my favorite players in the draft, I think was probably my favorite. And he seemed to really enjoy talking ball rather than, getting asked if he met with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I think that was fun for both of us. I don't want to speak for him, but I think it was my favorite just experience with a player this week.
Yeah, just some guys who I felt conveyed themselves really well and gave good answers, and were really well thought out. Malachi Starks, Javon Walker, Gray Zabel earlier today was a good one. Jackson Dart was a good one. And I didn't talk to this guy at the Combine, but I talked to him at the Senior Bowl. Jalen Milroe is impressive. I love his work ethic and his mentality as to how he tries to improve himself. I know he's polarizing as a player, but like you can't hate a guy who's trying to get better. And I think he's got a great mentality for that.
Yeah, and one more I want to add too. I wasn't able to get a question in with him because he had a crowd of people, but I was standing in the back row just, smiling ear to ear with hard eyes over my eyes, and it was Tyler Booker from Alabama. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's quotes that are being posted on Twitter from some of the things he said where he's like, I go out there to play football to make sure my opponent never wants to play again or whatever. Like my love of the game is making someone lose their love of the game. Yeah. I fell in love. Like I truly fell in love. They had to actually hold me back from the line because I was going to go give him a hug on there. But yeah, fantastic interview. Everything you want in an offensive lineman, top 10 player in this draft for me. Tyler Booker. Again, if he's there at 14, man, I'm running that card in personally. I mean, obviously it depends on what the Colts do in free agency with this offensive line, but Tyler Booker to me is a one-of-one player. Fantastic prospect in this draft.
The Colts having two guards locked into top 15 picks would be a choice.
My favorite choice. I love it.
It'd be a nasty run game. You got to admit that. Last one real quick is Georgia linebacker Smile Mondon Jr., a good target. Personally, a huge fan from this writer here from Twitter.
Look, man, Georgia linebacker that can run and play some special teams and was good at the Senior Bowl. Yeah, 100%. Good target for sure.
Good size, good athleticism. Yeah, I mean he's had decent showings through every little period of the offseason so far. So they could do much worse.
Oh yeah, it sometimes it's simple as that. Like, were they good in SEC school and they test well? Cool. All right, I won't complain with that kind of pick. But that's all we have for today, guys. We appreciate you tuning in for this Q&A episode. Yes, we did have to rail through a couple of these questions pretty quick because, again, you guys were awesome and sent us in so many. So please continue doing that for each and every Q&A episode. And thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season's over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you guys would become a Locked On Colts insider, chat with us directly and get that insider scoop and get first dibs on these Q&A episodes. Make sure you're following the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and Instagram. And also subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here on Monday.